Hey, guess what, Rockheads? Progress Telerik wants to send someone to build. So they're having a contest. Step 1 is to sign up and learn about the new innovative modern UI tools they'll be announcing at Build. By registering, you'll be entered to win a full conference pass to Microsoft Build plus a $500 travel stipend. They're also giving away 3 Telerik DevCraft UI licenses. And for .NET Rocks listeners, they'll also be giving away a Telerik DevCraft UI license every week. All you have to do is register at buildcontest.pwop.me. That's buildcontest.pwop.me. Progress offers the leading platform for developing and deploying mission-critical business applications. The creator of the award-winning Telerik.NET and Kendo UI, JavaScript user interface components and controls, reporting solutions, and productivity tools, Progress offers all the tools developers need to build high-performant, modern apps with outstanding UI. Go now to buildcontest.pwop.me and sign up to win. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Back here for April for more stuff.
Yeah.
More spring stuff. You know, we're recording this still in March. It's March 22nd. And we were supposed to have a big nor'easter here. This has been like the 4th one this in 3 weeks. This one was a dud where I live.
Well, funny, we got threatened for snow in Vancouver as well, and just rain. And I much prefer rain. You don't have to shovel rain.
I much prefer no precipitation, actually. I've had enough, actually.
The upside of the precipitation is it knocks down my allergies. As soon as it gets warm at the end of winter, the cedar pollens come out, and it's just murder for me for about 2 weeks.
And then you get those negative ions in the air after it rains, and it feels so good when you're breathing in. Yeah, that's good stuff.
That and better living through chemistry. Many, many drugs.
Okay. Well, let's roll the music for Better Know Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, man, what do you got?
This is sent to us by an alert listener, and it was Alexander Taran.
Mm-hmm.
It's a website called CodePen.io. And CodePen.io is sort of like the ultimate HTML, CSS, JavaScript playground.
Cool.
Yeah, it's all real time. So you just start typing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you get a preview pane, and you interact with it. And it's a really interesting way to get ideas across. And they basically the link 1533.pwop.me goes to a little, they call them pens, a pen that Alexander actually did for us, where he put in a data list Carl Richard .NET Rocks, and then with values better know a framework.
Nice.
But if you just go to codepen.io, you'll see all about what it is. And, they market it as a social platform for sharing ideas and working on things together.
What I like about this right away is this whole real-time visualization of your CSS changes. Because CSS is the thing I still struggle with.
Yeah, who doesn't? I mean, it's very powerful, but it is kind of abstract, and it's great to be able to just mess around with stuff and not have to, refresh all the time.
Exactly. Just to tinker with it. This sort of real time. This is cool, dude. I like this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of like, WebSockets meets Visual Studio. Well, the Visual Studio has a thing now, right? Where you can collaborate in real time.
Yeah, and in Docs, docs.microsoft.com, they've got that whole embedded code editor and executor. So that whole zero install. So you'd like to play with .NET. Here you go.
Better living through Signal R. That's what I call it.
It's a good one.
All right, who's talking to us, my friend?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1528. Also in March, that's the one we did with Christos Matskas, talking about Azure success stories. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more about Azure today. And Scott Mutlow says, this podcast felt very close to home for me. I had to laugh when Christos described their solution for fetching data from a file server using a logic app to put files into blob storage for processing by Azure functions. I had just wasted 4 days trying to figure out how to initiate SSH from within an Azure function. And I wondered if it was even possible, considering someone from Microsoft had to use a similar solution to what I ended up with. Is file SSH or is FTP a feature sorely missed from Azure Functions, or has it been left out due to inherent security issues? You know, why is it we still struggle to move files around?
Yeah, why is it?
It's because it's something you and I deal with all the time, right? I mean, how many different ways have you written code over the past few years to move our show files around?
Just about all of them. Every platform. Browsers, C#, WPF, Silverlight before that. Yeah, it's just one of those things you have to do. And unfortunately, some APIs require, blobs from this platform or that platform. Right. And so you do have to move stuff around. There isn't like one source of truth. But I am really enamored with Azure Files.
Yeah.
Which are just like SMB file share files that you just set up, and everything else in your operating system, System.io and all that just works. So I do like that. It's sort of like the best of blob storage plus, the ease of access where you don't have to just copy files and then access them, and then, they're just right there.
And I wonder if one of Scott's struggles here is because if he's thinking FTP, he's an old schooler.
Yeah.
And so it's like not looking at the new school ways. But I mean, this is from a couple of days ago, so hopefully he's worked his troubles out. But it just made me smile when I saw this comment, because it's like, we still have to move files around. That's life.
And, there's nothing wrong with FTP so long as you have no firewall issues, because you use passive mode if you want to connect to the server. You use 2 connections, and you use active mode if you want it to call back to you, which generally there's the firewall issue. On Windows anyway, you get a box coming up and says, hey, this guy wants to connect to you.
And especially when you're talking about Azure Functions, I just don't imagine them surfacing that functionality that way. You've got to use the Azure file approach. That's just the right thing to do. So Scott, we feel your pain, and I think we may laugh at it just a little bit, but not too much. But we feel it, only because it's familiar. So thank you so much for your comment. A .NET Rocks mug is on its way to you, and if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We finish them in pen. Pen. No, we don't do them in pencil.
I put white out on my screen again. Dang it.
All right, now let's introduce Vishwas Lele back to the show. He's been here many times. Vishwas is an Azure developer and a regional director, and he's been on the show many times, as I said. Welcome back to the show, Vishwas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. We always have interesting things to learn from you. You're a font of knowledge, especially about cloud computing, and we usually talk about Azure. What are we talking about today?
Well, we are talking about something that is related to Azure, but sits above Azure, if you will, something called the Business Application Platform.
And is that a Microsoft product?
It is.
Service?
Yes, it is indeed.
Okay. And so this is a service that you can, that runs on Azure that you can sort of sign up for?
Yes. You may not be familiar with the term business application platform. That was sort of a trick intro, but I'm sure you've heard of things like Power Apps, Flow,
sure.
Common Data Service.
Yep.
Those services constitute together what Microsoft has been calling business application platform.
Okay. I'm looking at on the web here. We'll have a link to it, but where's a good place to start? Is it just the business apps? Or Microsoft Business Platform, businessplatform.microsoft.com?
I think it's microsoft.com/BAP, Business Application Platform, BAP.
Okay. So give us the high visibility overview here, the 30,000-foot view.
So the idea really here is that there's this big movement around low-code development where you can write these kinds of applications without having to crack open Visual Studio.
Right.
And the idea is that you can write this application once and you can target multiple platforms. Pro developers can use it, but also the ability to bring citizen developers and maybe even power users to come in and make these applications. So one aspect of it is low-code development. And the other aspect, of course, is to take your existing backend data sources, if you will. You might have Office 365, SharePoint, you may have Dynamics, you may have Salesforce, hundreds of these different backend systems that you may have.
Right.
are you able to weave these information systems together and quickly create these multi-platform applications? That's, in a sense, what it is. And there was a big development just yesterday where the Power Apps team announced their spring update for 2018. And there was a very important announcement there that up until now, we could develop Power Apps, which were called the Canvas-style Power Apps. You open up an editor called the Power App Studio and design your app, drag and drop on the canvas and design your app. And internally, it will generate an app for you for any platform of your choice. But they announced something very interesting, which is the concept of a model-driven Power App, which you can essentially, you are creating an app that talks to a business process in the back. And what they've done is they're leveraging Dynamics platform in the back and combining that with the Power Apps model to create this model-driven application concept.
Yeah. Okay. And so the idea is that you can have a clear separation between business logic and services and just further break those things down?
Right. The idea is that separation. The idea also is that, even though there has been a lot of new capabilities coming to the Azure platform, as we have seen, right? Whether it is serverless compute in the form of Azure Functions, whether it is, Kubernetes. So there's a platform as a service play has been growing, with leaps and bounds. But at the same time, ability to just write applications that combines all of these backend data sources still remains difficult.
Yeah.
So what's happening is we've created this gap between what line of business applications that our businesses want and how much IT and development organizations and pro dev can produce, right? So how do you sort of bridge this gap? Because, these businesses are demanding these new applications. Data is spread out, more diverse. So can we create a layer above this platform as a service layer, okay, where you can connect to these backend data sources and then in a canvas-driven manner or in a model-driven manner, create these applications quickly. That's ultimately the idea here.
So we're talking about when we have data that's being accessed by Dynamics and Office 365 or just any kind of data sources that are out there, you define them with a business application platform, but there's also UI elements there too, right?
That is correct. That's correct. So, in a canvas driven approach, and for your listeners who've been using Power Apps, I don't want to confuse anybody. If you've been using Power Apps for the last 18 months since the announcement, you've been building what they're calling canvas driven apps. So, you go into a Power App Studio and you can choose the Windows Store version of it or a web version of it. And there are a pre-baked set of controls and layouts available to you. So you go and drag and drop them. You can also take advantage of a platform native capability like a camera or some sort of a sensor. And you draw all that out and you essentially bind it to a data source of your choice. And once you've done these two things, you can then publish this application. And by virtue of the fact that Power Apps is an app on iOS and Android and Windows and what have you, the application that you just publish becomes available to these users instantaneously without having to go through, the App Store and trying to get your mobile app approved.
That's a nice feature. And also, I imagine HTML, right? It works in a browser, these apps?
Yes. That's a very important aspect of it. So it works across Android, iOS, Windows devices, and the web.
So you're saying there's UI controls that you just create these applications with?
Yes.
And they just go everywhere? Just native?
That's correct. Well, not native. It is converting into,
hybrid on the mobile device.
It is a hybrid option, right? So it is leveraging, HTML under the covers, and then it is leveraging, for the platform specific capabilities you're using. It is leveraging those native libraries, but it is still giving you an experience, by being able to give you a set of controls which can work cross-platform. They're giving you this ability. to work across, target these multiple platforms.
And it looks like the type of application that it's very, good at doing, letting you do, is the kind where your employees or your field workers or select customers, might want insight, that kind of thing, right? I mean, just pure up business apps, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you're not going to write, an Instagram app using this technology, right?
Nor should you. Stop that.
No, not should.
Do something else.
True.
I like this sort of mentality of start with your existing data sources first.
Right.
Right. That it's the stuff you've already got in existing databases, the stuff you've already got in Dynamics, it's the stuff you've already got in Office. And this is being able to assemble data from multiple sources into a view.
That is exactly right. And they have, by the last count, and that number keeps changing, something like 160 connectors.
Right.
Wow.
To various services. You name a service, name a SaaS service, they probably have a connector. And then even more interestingly, you can just drop a gateway which allows you to go talk to an on-premises service that you may have, maybe a SQL Server residing on-premises, or maybe a web service or something else. And then you can bring custom connectors. So if you have an API that has a Swagger definition, that can be rolled into a connector as well and made available to Power Apps.
Vishwas, yesterday I was running on the treadmill and I dropped a gateway. Sorry.
But I do appreciate this idea of cloud-focused development.
Yep.
Right? What if you were going to build a tool to work on cloud development using the stuff that's already out there? I mean, I've got no problem with Visual Studio, but it's lower level than this. My first flash when I think Power Apps is like Light Switch.
Mm-hmm.
But this is, Light Switch and at one point, Light Switch and Power Apps were kind of competitors. Light Switch is more or less gone away, it seems, these days. I can't really find anyone working on it. But then Power Apps has kind of ascended.
That's true. That is true. And I like to think of Power Apps. This is just my opinion. This is not I'm not speaking for the product team or anything like that. You can't think of a tool in isolation like Power Apps, a low-code tool. You have to think about it as a platform perspective. It is the connectors.
Right.
It is the development environment. It is this ability to use your Office 365 subscription to share these apps, to collaborate, and things like that. That's what. And then now, yesterday's announcement, taking that into account, being able to take advantage of Dynamics 365 and the entities that are already there and the backend logic that you can embed. And now you have a full-fledged, what Gartner calls an APaaS platform, not platform as a service, but an application platform as a service.
Right.
That allows you to build these applications quickly. I want to give you an example of, we left that thread earlier about the kinds of apps you want to build.
Sure. And before we go there, just if we could pause for a second to hear this very important message. When you're building an application, you need it to be fast, secure, and always evolving. With Kubernetes Engine on the Google Cloud Platform, developers can deploy fully managed, containerized apps quickly and easily. Google has been running production workloads in containers for over 15 years, and they build the best of what they learn into Kubernetes, the industry-leading open-source container orchestrator. Kubernetes Engine combines automatic scaling, updates, and reliable self-healing infrastructure with open-source flexibility to cut down development cycles and speed up time to market. Learn more about Kubernetes Engine online at g.co/getgke. That's g.co/getgke. All right, we're back. It's Carl Franklin, Richard Campbell, .NET Rocks, Vishwas Lele is here. We're talking about business application platform, Microsoft, and he was just about to give us a good example of an application that fits perfectly in this platform.
Yeah, so thank you. The application that I want to talk about is, this happened almost 18 months back or so. Microsoft, the local Microsoft office here, was going to have a sales summit a regional sales summit. And at the last minute, they realized that they wanted an app for the attendees to be able to track sessions, to be able to collaborate with each other. And all of that data, and they also wanted to upload pictures, and there was some approval things. And literally a week or two before this event, right? So it's too late to go crack open Visual Studio and build that application, although I'm sure some of your listeners would take on that challenge.
I could do it. Sleep is for the weak.
But that's not me. So
right.
What we suggested was, okay, so where is the data? Where is there a schedule for all these events? Oh, yes, there is. There's a SharePoint list for that. All right. What are the other sources of information? Where do you want to store the images? Where we want to store it in a media library within SharePoint. Where's the approval? Here's the approval. So looks like you have these sources of information and you need them to be tied together. So opening up Power App Studio and then connecting it to SharePoint and then sort of binding it to that list data and then binding it to the controls very quickly gave us a way to show people all the schedules. Upload pictures, do approvals and things like that. So this is a great example. All the attendees were, Microsoft employees. So being able to share this app was just a matter of clicking a button saying, share this app with these people. And they go get Power Apps from a store of their choice or the device of their choice. And now this app shows up and they can pin that app and get access to that very quickly and look at the schedule, make comments and things like that. This was literally done in 1 week from the time classifying all of this requirements and then binding them and then putting it out.
Yeah.
And where do they deploy the app to, Vishwas? Are they putting it in the store or is it their own local thing?
So, what they're doing is, this is where we should talk about, what is a service doing when we talk about low-code development?
Right.
What is the role of the service? What is Power App Service providing? Why do you keep saying this is in the cloud? Because, hey, I could have written this application on an IDE of my choice and pushed it to a store of my choice. And so what is the service providing? Well, what the service is providing is enabling you all of the things that we would have to do as developers in terms of CI/CD and ALM. It's that service providing. So you go in, you create a connection or two. Let's say you connect to SharePoint. Then you open up the app, you get a control. Let's say you get a gallery control. You bind the data coming from a SharePoint list to a gallery control. And now you're happy with the gallery control. Let's just say this is a one-screen app. And now you save that. Now, by virtue of saving it, that version of the app has been saved. And people who within your organization who have been given contribute rights to this app can now just look at the app and provide you some feedback, right? And then once you're happy, you iterate it a few times, you click publish to the version that you see fit, and that app then becomes available to anybody who has read access to this application. So it's really a version control distribution mechanism that's all built in.
I like that.
Inside the service.
I like that because, that's where we usually turn to third-party tools and whole, chains of products and stacks for deployment and all that stuff. And it's great that this is just all built in. Are there any holes in it where you're going to need third-party tools?
Yeah. So, with any of these tools, and we have heard of these Power App citizen developer tools this is not a new concept. We have heard this over and over again, right? I think one of the challenges that you run into with these tools is you reach a point where you reach a cliff and, I need a specific customization that you're not providing. I need a control that you're not providing. I need to write a business logic. And we should take a moment to talk about how do you code in this low-code environment. We'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
But to specifically answer your question, you want to do some complex calculation. You don't want to necessarily write that calculation inside that Power App itself, right? The language itself is not expressive enough. Power Apps is a client-side technology. You don't want to bring that data on a device like that. So I think one thing that is different this time around is there is this extensibility story. So you want to write a complex piece of 200 lines of code, which you never should be coding inside this low-code application. Well, guess what? Write it in C# or Node or what have you, and drop it in an Azure function, right? And then invoke it from there. So that's the idea. So, some of my colleagues are saying, hey, why are you interested, Vishwas, in this low-code tool, right? I mean, doesn't it become challenging and limiting at some point? And I said, even though I'm a pro developer, I'm constantly looking for tools which will reach me to a point, that first pass as quickly as possible. And then we can figure out where we need to drop down and go into, platforms that give us a richer capability.
And I totally get this idea that we'd be able to build back-end services in .NET. I guess the question is, can you get under the hood of the client-side code?
So that's a great question. So let's just talk about how the client-side code comes about. So what they have done essentially with Power Apps is they have created an expression language, which looks very similar to an Excel expression language. Okay, so there are two ways you can program in Power Apps, and bear with me. This is more conceptual. We'll come to a more practical aspect in just 1 minute.
Okay.
Right? One is the concept of a declarative code, right? So much like in Excel, you want to take whatever is in cell A1, multiply it with cell A2, and then store the results in cell A3, right? So you have a bunch of formulas. You write them. And by the way, if you want to populate cell A3, nowhere in Excel can you just say that, hey, make A3 something. You actually have to go write that formula in A3 and say where the data is coming from. So essentially, you are creating a sort of a declarative model. You're just saying that you want these things to happen. And the engine under the covers, whether it is Excel or Power Apps, is constantly evaluating these data expressions. And if something changes, in Excel, it is a cell changing. In Power Apps, it is a grid control or a gallery control, some value changing somewhere, causing a change in some other part of the application or another screen. So that's constantly happening. That's a declarative model. And there's a rich library of functions. You'll find it interesting that library has a big overlap with Excel functions because, the designers of Power Apps really were going towards a model where think Excel, think declarative logic, right? Now, declarative model is not enough because you need to write imperative code if you're building an app. What if you want to click a button and want the event receiver to do something for you, make a web service call, for instance, right? There is no button and on-click method in Excel. Well, there is. It's called macros, but we're not talking about macros.
Right.
In Power Apps, there is this declarative logic as well, where start with declarative, and then there's imperative logic where you can say, hey, when somebody clicks on this button, make a call to this web service. So you have flexibility in terms of what you can do with declarative code. There are some really powerful expressions like a patch command, which allows you to go talk to any data source of your choice. But there are variables, of course. There's a screen level variable. There's a global variable. There are collections. So as developers, it probably take us a couple of hours to understand the programming constructs there. But there is no way to extend the language itself or bring your own controls at this point.
Right. Okay. That's fair. That's happened to where we are. And it's actually its own WYSIWYG studio, its own IDE, right? This is not, you don't build Power Apps in Visual Studio.
No, in fact, there's a very nice web designer. This is just a web editor. That's my actually practice of building apps. There's also a Windows Store app, and then there is an equivalent web-based editor for Power Apps, and I tend to use that because I may be using it from any platform.
Right. So so you have a zero install way to build these things as well as something you can install on your machine if you want.
That's right.
Very cool.
That's right.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah. It's time to take a 4-stroke overhead cam power shredder to all my old SCSI hard drives. Oh, wait a minute. Nobody can read them anyway. They're SCSI. I'll just throw them away.
Yes. I guarantee you can't find a Terminator for it.
Right. Terminator. What's that? It's actually time to give away a D-Experience subscription from DevExpress to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. You know, everyone knows that DevExpress has great desktop controls, but their web tools are simply amazing. They have a collection of HTML JavaScript controls called DevExtreme. The heart of this product line includes powerful controls like grid, chart, pivot grid, tree list, and scheduler. But DevExtreme also comes with more than 50 touch-optimized client-side controls. Data visualizers, navigators, editors, lists, dialogues, and notification controls. And general-purpose controls like filter builders, range sliders, file uploaders, scroll viewers, and more. And since they're all HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS, they include integrations with things like jQuery, Knockout, React, Ionic, and Angular. And DevExtreme controls also come with ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Core wrappers. But don't take our word for it. Go for a test drive right now at dx.netrocks.com. That's dx.netrocks.com.
Well, all right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Alan Sanborn.
Golf clap for you, sir.
Yeah. Way to go, Alan. And Alan just won the D-Experience subscription. That's a big pile of awesome from our friends over at DevExpress, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the .NET Rocks fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But you got to sign up to win. And we also like to ask our guest, Vishwas, if you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
As always, I'm unprepared to answer this question, but I was the MVP Summit. And I saw some, Scott was doing his Scott Go Unplugged, and he showed us this Make Code website where you can, program something and then buy a simple device and then download that on that Make Code device. I've not explored it myself, but it's very interesting. It would be lovely to get, and he said something like $14 or $20. It'd be lovely to get a collection of these devices and then hand it out to kids, because it really seemed interesting as to, oftentimes when we are doing this, an hour of code, you're teaching kids, some basic programming, moving a robot to the left or to the right or forward or back, being able to take that program and drive a physical object using that program is what I understood of Make Code. So maybe buying several kits of those and handing out to elementary kids would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
It's funny. I've had a bunch of conversations recently with folks who want to get into classrooms and sort of get kids excited about programming. And that common theme comes up again and again. You've got to make it a bit more physical. Even a flashing LED is better than just code running on a screen. And I recalled, I actually mentioned it to someone. I said, Carl did it with a drone.
I did it with
the impact
a drone,
of a drone taken off in a classroom, epic.
I'm just surprised they let me do it. It was in middle school, and I had just cleared a little path, and I had written 5 lines of code to say, drone.takeoff, drone.hover for 3 seconds, drone go forward for 3 seconds, drone stop, and drone land. That's it. And kids were just amazed, but they were like, hey, can you run that into Tommy? We don't like him.
Immediately in with the injuries.
Yeah, they immediately looked at it as a weapon. They wanted to chase the teacher around the classroom and all that. Can you put guns on that thing, man? Oh, well. But I think that's a very honorable thing to do. And kids are starving for this kind of direction from grown-ups. I was amazed when I did this talk, and I don't want to steal your thunder here, but I was amazed at showing kids Google Earth for the first time. They had never seen it. And, we just assume that, kids are hip and they know about these things, but they didn't know about text. This was a couple of years ago, but they didn't know about speech to text, speech recognition. That blew them away. I just showed them things that were cool. And I like that.
I agree with Richard. I think Microsoft, I was reading a Microsoft research article. They call this physical computing.
Right.
This ability, I had not been familiar with this term till I read. Makes a lot of sense. You're teaching kids, let's say, to make a virtual cat move forward or back. Being able to translate that program and then drop it on a physical object and then have that do that will exponentially increase the stickiness of that exercise, and kids would be interested. They can put their hands around it. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just engagement. No two ways about it. I was just thumbing through the list of connectors available for Power Apps, and look, there's SFTP.
Yeah.
So I may not be able to do it from a function, but I can do it from the client.
Yeah.
Very funny. Can we talk about the broader platform here? Like, what Power Apps has clearly been around for a while. These new features are pretty powerful. Model-driven development, lots of interesting things here. So what is the business application platform part beyond Power Apps?
So that's a great question. So Power Apps is one aspect of course, whether it is canvas-driven apps or model-driven apps. Then you have Flow, which is a sister service to Power Apps. So if you're trying to write some sort of a workflow, approval, what have you, you can very quickly, in a visual manner, design your workflows. And once again, you can take advantage of the connectors that we previously talked about. So you want to receive a message from Nest or alarm.com and then take an action and then have a notification be sent into your Power Apps. You can do that.
Right.
So workflow, the visual designer part, which is the Power Apps canvas. Then you can have workflows on the server side, which manifest themselves as the model-driven apps. And then there is this notion of a common data service, which I've not used up until now. We had CDS up until now, common data service, but with yesterday's announcement, CDS for app, it basically allows you to tap into the Dynamics entities. So we used to have a notion of XRM, if you remember,
right?
Where you had these entities, and Dynamics is a powerful platform. It gives you all kinds of server logic and workflow capabilities. So imagine that you want to take advantage of these server-side entities, do some calculations and the validations on the server side, and quickly model out these entities. It is completely, the benefit, of course, is that, unlike, let's say go to Azure SQL database, which is a great database as a service capability, which provides you a lot of features. But here, all you're doing is defining in terms of business entities, and everything else is managed for you. And you can now bind it into the apps. So workflow, visual designer, server-side logic, extensibility to put it all together. And then you have ability to go to, Azure Functions and tap into any of those connectors. Think of this together and you start having all the tools that you need to start sort of building these applications for businesses.
Where do Logic Apps fit in, other than the fact that there's no restriction, you can use them as much as you want, but is there any overlap there?
Yeah, so Logic Apps is the underlying technology for Flow.
Right.
Flow makes it really easy for you to use it. It is sort of the consumer SKU, if you will, for Logic Apps. But if you wanted to write, more detailed workflows, you wanted to have more control over what identity under which a certain workflow step is running, then you would drop down to Logic Apps.
And it strikes me that the connectors for Power Apps are probably the same connectors for Flow.
That is correct.
That these things are all actually related code.
That is correct.
So what I find interesting here is like we're used to lower level programming. Like I have actually looked at the SQL server that Dynamics CRM uses, and you don't want to query that thing directly.
Yeah.
But you could.
You could.
If you hate yourself.
You'd be confused.
Right? There's the API level to CRM, and you can call the APIs directly, but they're pretty complicated too. And then there was the XRM approach, their own sort of coding language for pulling data. This is a layer above that now you're just saying, hey, when a new customer or new prospect is added to CRM, trigger this workflow.
Right.
So I just think it's interesting to me that we're just getting to higher level abstractions. I don't know how we all feel about the citizen developer mindset. Because we quite possibly came from there in the first place, right? That we were folks that had other careers that then got interested in programming because we were trying to get something solved, and then programming became more interesting than the career.
It certainly takes the right kind of business person, don't you think, Vishwas? I mean, we've tried to give business people the ability to build apps many, many, many times. And, generally it's the ones that are programming centric in the first place, usually.
That is true. That is true that, you need some inclination towards programming concepts, however simple they may be, to be able to pull it off. But let me give you an example, right? You're a business analyst, and you go to a SharePoint list, and, you're well versed with the SharePoint capabilities and how it works, and you can customize things. Now imagine that there is a button sitting right there inside SharePoint, which it is. And you can say, hey, create me a Power App based on this list that I just defined.
Yeah.
And rather than giving me the raw list experience, I want to create a subset view of this list. And then let me design this view and make that available so that this Power App, even though, we've been talking about Power Apps as a mobile story, can now be embedded within SharePoint site itself.
Nice.
Imagine that. That I find that many of the business analysts that we work with on the SharePoint side absolutely can do something like that. And not only that, they click on, let's say, hey, I want to use this list as a data source, and let me design a custom view of this list. And oh, by the way, I really need to, in addition to this, I need to show a Power BI dashboard. Right. Inside this app itself. So now I come into SharePoint and oh, by the way, somebody has already created this Power BI dashboard, but I want to put these two things together. And that is something that you really don't have to know variables and loops and debugging and things like that to be able to accomplish.
Yeah. Let's talk about being able to turn this into an app that you'd hand to a developer. Can you get low-level access to these things? Do you want low-level access? Are there entry points? That kind of thing?
Right. So in this case, you cannot. In the past, we have tried that approach, and that didn't work that well. I mean, the promise of something like SharePoint Designer was that, you can start in SharePoint Designer and you can do what you can with it. And then at some point you can take that, export it, and then import it into Visual Studio, and then keep going. This is my view again, that sounded too good to be true, right? The artifacts that you started with in the SharePoint Designer were really not the artifacts that you want to base your Visual Studio project on, right? So that was a good story, but I don't know how in reality that was effective. So in this case, by saying that, no, this is an expression language, much like Excel, right? And you start here, but then you don't try to put, detailed business logic here. So if you have that discipline and, you can get hold of a pro dev and say, write me this piece, drop it as a function and, or as a flow or a logic app, and just tell me how to just interact with it. That model will keep it simple. And I think probably a better model to go with.
Yeah, and you obviously can create extensibility by building logic apps and functions and so forth.
Sure.
But the UI itself has got to be written in this form with this tool.
Right.
And hey, it generates to web, Win 10, iOS, and Android. Like, try and be unhappy.
Well, what if you wanted to tweak the CSS or something in some way that you can't through the tool, or maybe there isn't anything you can't do?
You cannot tweak, at least in its current form, you cannot tweak the CSS. I mean, you can do things, there were a few apps that were shown at Ignite. For example, I think there was an app from Pepsi where, you have a field worker going around and trying to restock these supplies. And it looked like a very branded app. And, there are tricks to be able to do that. You just change the background to something and you place your controls in a manner that it gives you that impression of styling that app in that manner. I should say that, Power Apps, it's an interesting intersection between Excel and PowerPoint, right? So much like in PowerPoint, you can come in and set your theme and it changes all your screens. That notion also applies here in Power Apps as well.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Like I said, I'm always looking for the holes. Where are the brick walls? You know, where are the challenge points in its current incarnation?
Right, and I think that's how we developers tend to look at this.
Yeah.
Where is it going to blow up on me? Yeah.
My take would be that there's so much of business functionality. Somebody said that line of business applications are never ever complete, no matter how many resources you put on it, right? So I'm just thinking that you have this traditional IT organization with a certain budget, certain capacity, certain number of pro dev capacity. They can only build a certain number of applications, right? In the meantime, I have all of these business users who are expecting this consumer-like experience. They want to pull up their phones of their choice. They want to be able to complete an action by themselves using the phone, right? And now we've created this gap, and that gap is only widening, right?
Yeah.
And what I also like, there's a interesting, and I'll send you a link to this so you can add to the show notes. There was a podcast from MSR about context switching and the problems associated with context switching, and this idea that can you take a task and break it down to such a small granular level where it is not context switching. So what does that mean? So I'm an information worker. I enter my office. And, I have 4 or 5 or 10 applications that I have to deal with. I have to go to SharePoint to look at something. I have to go to a system of record, which may be a mainframe, to look at my orders. I have to log into Dynamics to look at, my sales contacts and so on and so forth, right? Each one of that requires me to switch context and go to that system, take an action, copy something from there, move it to another application, right? That's just the reality.
Yeah.
Now, if you can build something like a Power App, which grabs through the connectors all of the information that is needed for that context and make it available in an app, right? For quick actions, they need to approve something, they need to go look up something. All of that is available on their phones or tablet or a web edit or a browser, what have you. Mm-hmm. It just starts to make a dent into this gap that we have created between the information worker expectations and what IT is able to produce.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I guess that's a roundabout way of saying, yeah, it does what it does. It does it really well. And if you want something that it doesn't do, you're going to have to write yourself. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Same story.
We have great tools. Xamarin is a great cross-platform technology. Absolutely. Right. Go there.
Yep. Very good. Vishwas, anything that we missed? Is there some other thing that you want to talk about before we call it a show?
No, I think these have been great questions. I think you've covered it all. So I appreciate the questions.
Well, this tool has the distinct pleasure of being one of these shows that I immediately want to go check it out after hearing about it. Mm-hmm. And now I'm angry because I only have half an hour before we have to record the next show. And I really want to just go play with this thing. So
it's funny you say that. Carl, it's funny you say that. Remember I was talking about this app that we built for the Sales Summit, Regional Sales Summit. Uh-huh. The many people who started using this, they realized, is this a Microsoft technology? How is this app built? Right? So I think I'm glad to hear what you just said, that, you want to go check it out, and I hope your listeners will do the same.
Oh, yeah, definitely. All right, Vishwas, thanks very much. It's always enlightening to talk to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Richard.
All right. We'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a